What the heck is going on? Now, I know London has nothing to lose with the Overwatch League schedule being about wrapped up, and Shock haven't exactly looked crisp, but what was that match on Saturday? Some of the most bizarre compositions that we have ever seen in Overwatch League, and one of the strangest maps and the most entertaining matches of all time. Shock goes into this match versus a relatively beat-up London Spitfire who've had a pretty hard time this season, and London just whips out Symmetra May and any variation of obnoxious brawl they possibly can, forces it, and makes it work. Now, this is going to be mostly focusing on what the Shock did wrong, but the first thing I want to elaborate on is that I really do feel like London, at many points in this series, played really, really well and deserves a lot of the credit. I think as much as Shock fumbled away this win, I do think that London did a lot of things right, and you can make a really good argument that playing well earlier, especially in the series, is what put Shock in such a fragile mental state that ended up looking so ugly later on. So full credit goes to London, but let's lambast the Shock just a little bit. Now, to be fair to Shock here, a lot of changes have been made recently. Obviously, a new backline, Striker's on the move, so I know Striker was not available for this match. And obviously some difficulties with the living situations earlier in the season. But what we saw yesterday was some of the strangest Overwatch that we've ever seen, and I'm being generous. We're going to talk about their composition swaps, a little bit on the execution, but this is going to be a little bit of a longer video because I want to go over every single niche weird choice that they did and talk about what they could have done better instead. Let me go through my notes here. I'll also want to provide some solutions about what they could have done instead. I'm not intimately educated on what Probe and Jundin's hero pools are, and I do think that maybe some of those limitations or lack of comfort picks had at least a small percentage chance or a small percentage impact on why things were strange yesterday. It seems like Probe was not interested in playing Tracer. I'm not sure how comfortable Jundin is on Doomfist. So those are definitely some things that are worth pointing out. But regardless, I think we can look at some stuff here. So one of the biggest problems, though, before we talk about anything else, is Shock really can't play dive all that well. They've looked off and on okay at points, to give them credit, but the way that London was playing, especially in maps like Gibraltar and Eichenwalde, and at least Bronza as well, there's really no reason for you to have to go super, super cheese. It wouldn't even take a very high-level dive team to beat what London was playing. You see, the Symmetra May has lots of ways of winning a neutral, but the problem with Brawl versus Dive, and this has been the case for, going into last season when I was coaching Brawl with London, is the ult game is just rough. It's miserable. Nano, Primal, EMP, there just aren't very many good options for the Symmetra Brawl team. Now, Symmetra Wall helps a little bit because that is a stronger ultimate, but it's not enough to compensate, especially in maps that favor dive. So the number one question to me is, why was Shock missing so much confidence in their dive to where they weren't even willing to take the match? And now, as I said, Shock aren't good at dive, so that's something that decision definitely had an impact on the compositions that they were playing, but they showed so little confidence, almost to the opposite end of the spectrum, that I'm questioning why they did what they did. So I don't know what's going on, guys. I can tell you that, again, even a mid-table dive team would have been able to beat London on many of the maps that they were playing, but Shock is just not confident in their dive, and to be fair, they haven't looked all that great at it. So, okay, so let's start with Antarctica. I'm going to kind of let these things play in the background here, just as I'm going through. Let me make sure that we're all good here. Yeah, we're all good. Okay, so basically, I'm just going to let it play. First little interesting niche choice here from Shock. We're going to have Renko rolling on an Ana. This ends up not working out so well. When you pick Ana, you lose a lot of sustain compared to a Baptiste. Baptiste has a lot more healing. The defensive cooldowns are really, really powerful for your main tank, and the ultimate is actually pretty good in the Brawl Mirror. However, they go Ana instead. Now, the reason they go Ana, there's two reasons. Nano Ram, which they find a lot of value out of, it immediately gets on the backline with a speed boost, and it basically just annihilates the backline. They did that one well, but one thing that they did not do well is you lose a lot of sustain on your Ram, but you gain anti-nade. And as this map kind of opens up, there should be a lot of opportunities to land anti-nades on the backline, even if it's just to force May Ice Block, force Lamp, whatever. But basically, we can look at a lot of things in this map, but one of these is that the anti-nades just were not happening this map, almost at all. So that's one of the reasons why I think Shock is unable to pull this one out. The Ana is definitely an unusual choice, but there is logic behind it. It just wasn't executed really well. And I think that's one of the main takeaways is where Shock does stuff that makes sense, the execution isn't there. And that's just when they make swaps that actually make sense. Moving on to the next map here, going on to the pharmacy. This is where we start to see some flashes of, whoa, what are they cooking kind of a thing. London rolls out on Hanzo Mei. I think London was expecting a Brawl Mirror here. But let's talk about this composition. The first thing that really points is obvious here is the Orisa swap. So Orisa is a hero that does really, really well in spamming out low damage compositions. So if it's a Symmetra Mei, Reaper Moira, Sombra, anything like that, the Orisa could do a pretty good job about shooting tank, shooting DPS, basically just surviving. But one thing that Orisa has really bad survivability at is versus any sort of spam damage. She doesn't have a shield. She doesn't have any sort of range threat. She doesn't have a lot of mobility to avoid the spam. So you roll out an Orisa and they go Hanzo Mei, disaster. Even the Batiste is difficult to deal with the spam pressure. It's really easy to force Javelin, spin, to force Fortify, but just shooting the Orisa. And unless they're expecting London to roll out the Symmetra Mei here, which I would not expect them to, the Orisa is a terrible, terrible pick for this. It is, especially when combined with the Kiriko, who just doesn't have the sustain to keep the Orisa up. The Kiriko wants to be taking angles. If you're gonna run the Orisa, you need to be running this with the Batiste so that you have the sustain and the shield pressure. And then yes, you are vulnerable to being rushed at, but at least you have some sort of beef behind your main tank. So Shock's comp makes no sense. It's playing for angles with the Pharmacy and Kiriko, and the soldier to a lesser extent, but then it's playing for like frontline sustain, but it doesn't have the sustain for it, and it's also Orisa's the worst pick that you could play into what Spitfire are playing. It's just terrible. You would really want something that would look like more like a ball Pharmacy Kiriko, maybe with a Tracer there. Again, I don't know what Probe is comfortable at with flankers. Maybe even a Sombra would have made a lot more sense. And if you wanted to leverage into the more heavy frontline spam pressure, you'd swap your Kiriko off to a Batiste, and then what that would make it difficult for London is London would have to choose: do we rush the soldier on the angle, or do we rush the Batiste in the backline? Basically, Probe just gets run on this entire game, or Junbin gets spammed out this entire round, and it's one of the most ugly Koth rounds that you're ever going to see in the Overwatch League. I like the swaps from London. The Cassidy Sombra is really, really, really nice, but it's actually just a garbage composition from Shock. It's not good versus anything that London wouldn't roll out on. Even if they were running out on Symmetra Mei, it's really just too easy for them to counter swap this. And versus Symmetra Mei, you really wouldn't I mean, it would make sense, but the soldier would still be better on a Sombra in that situation, because that's still a target that the Symmetra Mei can run down. And then what ends up happening is Shock end up panic swapping to Mei and Sojourn, which don't have anywhere near the amount of damage. By the way, keep in mind, this is pre-patch Sojourn, by the way. The Sojourn is not buffed. And I don't even know what they're running at this point in time. And that's, again, another thing that we have coming up, where they'll roll out on a composition, which is kind of strange, but then a lot of the mid-match swaps just make it worse. Like, the Shock ends up fumbling the bag, and like I said, this is a lot of psychological pressure that London's putting out here, where they're just basically rolling the dice and causing chaos, and Shock are not handling it well at all. Okay, look at so yeah, basically just worse brawl. Let's move on to the next match here. So Shock defends with this composition. This composition is super, super greedy. I'm not a really big fan of this one. Again, it kind of ties into the hero pool question here. I mean, you can see London legitimately is not scared of this composition at all. They don't even try to counterpick. They don't even go Symmetra into this composition, because the problem with this composition is that you have double spam DPS that are both very, very greedy and need support. Like, Probe needs healing to be able to build upper rail. He's not able to put out range pressure until he builds rail, and he's very easy to poke out. Proper demands pocket. Even Junbin's going to require a lot of babysitting, because Ana is going to need to be, he's on Winston, excuse me. He's going to need Ana pocket. Now, I want to point out a little detail here that I'm going to kind of yell at the developers of Overwatch 2 really fast. Do you want to know why Junbin isn't starting out in a Wrecking Ball here? It's because of Cassidy Mei. I wouldn't say Wrecking Ball is hard countered by Cassidy Mei, but it can be very difficult to play, even at a pro level, into Sticky in the new freeze. So Junbin should be on ball here, and we should have Probe on a flanker. Maybe you could argue that would still be worth playing, maybe even opening on a Pharmacy defense for Shock, but Junbin clearly doesn't want to go ball into this comp because of the new abilities. So congratulations, Blizzard. You've nerfed the tanks like Doomfist and Ball that don't have ways of dealing with the CC abilities, but you've actually not really nerfed Winston at all. You've just made a miserable experience for other people without actually addressing the root issue. Classic Blizzard move. Sorry, a little bit salty there. I'm a big Winston fan, but the Cassidy Mei changes are just some of the worst changes I think we've ever seen in Overwatch 2. Okay, so anyway, regardless, Junbin goes ball and goes, you know what? No, I'm not going ball. Let's go Doomfist instead, or Ramatra, because Ramatra actually has ways of avoiding a CC. And this is actually probably, I would say, the best swap that Shock did Well, the best swap was Shock did was this right here. This was these swaps made the most sense. You got Probe on Sombra. We've seen a lot of his Sombra. I don't know how good it's looked, but it's been enough to beat teams that are okay. So I think it's decent. The Echo swap, the Ramatra swap, this should be okay. Now the Ramatra is fragile. The Ana is fragile. We're gonna see London swap to a Symmetra to TP, but again, they have to pick and choose which one they want to go on top of. And meanwhile, you've got a damage boosted Echo on the back line, and the other DPS plus either Ramatra or Ana, whichever one's not being rushed, being able to focus and trade. And you are able to start on high ground here. So this to me is probably the best swap that Shock made versus the Brawl composition this entire match. The only problem here, and we're going to skip to this fight, is the execution, right? When they make the right swap, somehow they just fumble the bag with execution. And so this fight right here, so this is London's fight to win. They've got the sim wall, and they've got the beat, and then they're going to come up eventually on Blizzard as this fight progresses. But this is like their fight to win. And this is the fight that Shock loses. So Shock ends up getting a lot of early pressure on a Junbin. I'm not sure exactly how he got so low, but he ends up getting really low panic ults. They get Hottie down, and they end up killing Hottie. Really, really, really nice. Okay, so that's okay. You're fine. They've used Beat. They've used Simwall. Basically their two most powerful ultimates. You're good to go. All Shock need to do now is chill. Even if Junbin dies, it doesn't matter. You have the high ground control. Instead, we have a copy. I want to talk about the copies really fast. I did make a tweet about this, but I want to clarify this. Copy is not an ultimate that you really want to be using versus this composition. You do not want to copy. You do not want to copy versus this composition because your job is better done as Echo. If there was an Ana to copy, if there's a Tracer to copy, a Winston, something that had a little bit more direct impact, maybe it's understandable. If you have to copy it because you're very low or you're going to die, totally fine to copy. This copy is probably the best copy into their composition because there isn't a better target other than they. But you shouldn't copy. And so what ends up happening is Proper forces a copy. Probe dies to turrets. We will see him off screen. He just doesn't use Translocator. So I have no idea what's there. Again, classic Shock fumble. But also, this is a huge fumble from Proper. Proper just needs to stay in the sky with his Mercy and just chill. So instead, Shock just troll the lobby, 2 people dying unnecessarily, and then even Rinko drops onto cart, assuming the fight is lost. But what ends up happening is Rinko dies on cart because the fight's lost, right, guys? I thought Admiral booped him, but he actually doesn't. He just jumps off. But then at the same time, Luke goes for the res, thinking the fight is still winnable, and so we have a nice little stacker here, and it's ugly, guys. It's real ugly. And this is what Shock was really struggling with. Like they just were fumbling the bag in situations when they shouldn't. And I'm not gonna go over the third defense too much. Basically, the swaps they make to like a really heavy spam dive with like Echo and Hanzo, it like plays to their strengths. It's fine. The main takeaway here is that once again, Shock like really fumbles the bag when it comes to Echo copy and old economy. This fight coming up here is the worst example where they have both beat and copy forced. Proper copies Reinhardt. I don't know why. And then they beat engage, and then London just freaking runs away. Really nice kite from London. I mean, this is just phenomenal. There's even a Tracer on the flank there at the same time. But it just makes Shock look like complete morons. So anyway, let's move on to the defense here for London. So Shock's gonna go Ram, Echo, Sojourn. I think this is too greedy. I think Ram's gonna have a hard time getting space here, and that ends up being the case, like where they're able to choke out the Ram really easily. I would much rather prefer, again, something like a Sombra. Honestly, at this point in time, even into the Castmate, maybe a Wrecking Ball on the flank with the Sombra would be a lot better. It'd at least give Shock some sort of old economy here. What ends up happening, or honestly, really, like a Pharmacy here would do really well. This is one of the best Pharmacy points in the entire game, swapping onto Echo for second point. Totally fine to do that. We see a lot of full holds on this map in Overwatch League, and I don't understand what Shock's composition is supposed to do. It's about the most greedy variant that you could do, but it's not even the best greedy variant. If you wanted the best greedy variant, then you'd go something like the Pharmacy that I was describing earlier, and then run that with the Sojourn. But again, the problem is that there's too much healing needed in too many different directions. Junbin, Proper, Probe all need support. Rinko as well might need support depending on if he's going to get pressured or not. So it's just there's too many people in need, and so nobody gets the pocket that they deserve. And then the crucial thing too as well is when Shock hits their ult spike, this is what happens. Again, London's ults not that great. Even with the Ram that they can theoretically freeze, not that great. So there's Valk, The copy on the Ryan, I don't know what to tell you guys. Again, there just should be no copy here at all. And if there is going to be a copy, maybe a copy to cast, may, bap, something that can kind of poke and play from a safe distance. This is just completely wasted. So Junman dies. That's Proper's copy. That's Valk. There's Sojourn ult, but Probe doesn't get pocket. Probe also mispositions himself. Probe should probably have been nanoed, and they should have looked for an Ajax on the Admiral. London ends up kiting it out. It's a huge shatter from Hadi. And then we're going to see Nano wasted on a Proper when they're already down 2, and then he just freaking dies. So Shock of going to this with 4-5 crucial ultimates, fumble the bag, panic swap the Brawl, and it goes predictably. So again, questionable swaps, questionable opening comp, and then just fumbling the bag when it matters. All right, let's keep going. Now, this is where things get weird. Everybody kind of has been talking about this one. So let me be honest with you guys. This is a cheese. This is a push cart cheese from London. And it basically is all about pushing cart, not fighting for high ground too much. You have the TP if you need to. They will TP Hadi up a couple times to kind of contest the high ground, but the job is to push cart. Get the fight on cart where our ults can actually do something. And it's an okay strat. It's not an Overwatch League level strat, I would say, in this current meta. But it's something that they do not respect Shock's dive. They do not respect Shock's dive, and it turns out that they are 100% right, especially at this point in time. So you're going to see basically just some plays to clear high ground, rotate, clear high ground. They're really watching out for on and nade. Probe just needs to SMG and build ult as fast as he can because there's no poke damage from London, and he does just that. Junman freaking dies. That's a very common theme throughout the series, Junman dying to basically air. So again, not a great individual performance. Another thing that's worth pointing out as well is that this comp, as we talked about earlier, is going to have its issues in the neutral. Symmetra May is going to do really well in the neutral, even on a map like this, if Rinko cannot land a big nade. However, it's really, really important that I'm just watching Junman use bubble for literally no reason. It's just painful to me. It's really, I think Junman actually just dies here too. Yeah, Junman just dies. Okay, and then the EMP down 1, and then he just dies, and yeah, I remember this. Yeah, this is a disaster. Anyway, long story short, they fumbled their ult game, and that's the big thing there. Is like Shock cannot fumble their ult game here because this composition gets ult cycled like nobody's business. It's actually unbelievable how good Primal, Nano, EMP, even Pulse Bomb is ridiculous into the London's comp. I want to point out as well, Luke really should have swapped Kiriko there immediately. There's no reason to run a Brig with your Ana when your Ana is at no risk of being dove by flankers. In fact, the Brig is actually just another easy target to TP on and kill, even with Shield Bash. Kiriko allows for more off-angle pressure. The ultimate is actually decent because Rally pushing into this comp isn't necessarily a free fight win. And you have a lot more off-angle control, off-angle pressure for your Sombra. Like, you could park your Kiriko with your Sombra or Tracer and just infinitely farm damage. So I like the Kiriko a lot better in this composition than the Brig. He does end up making the swap later, but it's a little bit too late. The Genji swap, by the way, is actually pretty fine. It gives you a big spike in the old economy into this comp because he will get help with his Winston and Sombra and Ana. The problem is that obviously, they're kind of being snowballed here, and then what ends up happening is a huge fumble where Junman essentially uses Primal for nothing because he goes in too early. So Primal is used for basically nothing. It does force beat out, but that's more of a lucky juggle than anything else. Shattered, beefed, unfortunate, not the end of the world. And then Shock make a really crucial mistake here. The Genji. Nano Genji is not great into this composition unless they have like literally somebody's on top of somebody with 1 HP. Nano Winston is much better at dealing with the shields, the Symmetra wall, the lamp, the boop. So much better to nano your Winston into this composition and let him build his next primal and then blade afterwards. You don't need Nano Genji into this. And what ends up happening is he just freaking dies. Luke is late with the rally. So basically the TLDR, without going into the details here, is the Shock's comp, especially once they swap off the Brig, is actually okay. They just can't fumble the bag with the ults. And they repeatedly fumbled the bag. I mean, London were winning more of the ult fights. And that's like crazy. That should never happen. By the way, this is a really good swap from London. This gives them an EMP beat fight, which all they need to do is just kind of like force cart until it's a one fight territory and then just get EMP and beat value, which is pretty much what they do. The problem here is, not to be negative Nancy, is that once again, Shock completely fumbled the bag with ultimates. Check this out. So Luke goes on the flank with Kitsune Rush, and they goof up. So there's an EMP dive there, and we have Kitsune Rush. Blade doesn't even happen. The EMP is used down 2. No idea what Probe is thinking here at all. even the kill on Landon isn't worth it. If they've been able to wait for the recontest, touch the last second with the EMP blade, Shock 100% win this. Junman loses, then now the blade poor Popper is down by himself. So it's like, again, Shock goes in this fight with EMP, Kitsune Rush, and Blade. And even into a beat EMP, you can't lose that fight. It's just way too difficult with a high ground. So really, 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 really ugly, ugly, ugly fight from Shock. And this is where things start to get even weirder, if that's even possible. Now, London opens up with the Symmetra and the spawn camp, which is good. You try and get 3 fights here. London actually doesn't play this one very well. They play it on the second time around a lot better. This is my problem with this. The Bastion is... I'm not a huge fan of the Bastion. It's a target that you can TP onto and run, and has a really, really weak ult economy. But it's not even my worst hero on the list here. The Junkrat is only really necessary for the second fight, but it's not even, I don't even think it's 100%, I don't think it's 100% necessary. I think the Echo Mercy or Pharmacy even here would be a lot better. The reason why Junk was played here is because that on the second fight around the corner in that tiny little room, Junkrat is really, really helpful. The best hero in the game in that situation. But I wonder if there wasn't a way to utilize something like an Echo and maybe get some cart push so that the cart can go past that point. Then the London will not be able to recontest or contest from here. So I'm not as much of a fan of the Junkrat. I understand the logic behind it. I still think they could have gotten away with the Echo, and Echo transitions significantly better to the rest of the map. And hopefully he doesn't copy Ryan anymore. Maybe that's the problem. He copies Ryan too much and then gets mental boomed. In this situation right here, Shock's comp is really quite good. Maybe the Ana is a little bit risky. Maybe something like a BAP would be a little bit better, but it could do just fine because like you have like the highest amount of spam damage and the choke in the game. Ends up getting a little bit hairy, but like right here, for example, Proper really, really ought to go Echo like as fast as he possibly can. He should not be staying on Junkrat beyond this point whatsoever. And I actually want to call out London at this point in time. London, you should have swapped Hanzo. I don't know what you were doing. The only reason Shot goes as far as they can is because they stay on the Symmetra, which the Junkrat is not terrible versus. If they had gone Hanzo here, would have completely ruined Shock's day. Bastion, Junkrat would have made Ana difficult to play. And honestly, Orisa, again, we talked about it on Antarctica, really struggles with these sort of range poke DPS heroes. I get the rest of the brawl. I don't get the staying in the Symmetra. Even if you're trying to take multiple fights, that it doesn't make any sense. You didn't need it. I think this is a big miss from London here. Okay. So yeah, I don't know why they say Bastion Junkrat was a huge mistake from Shock. They do end up like grinding it out, but the Junkrat isn't really any part of that whatsoever. We don't get a lot of Riptire value. We don't get a lot of pick value. It's basically probe carrying and doing well. And I think the Orisa as well works fairly well because they're not on Hanzo. So there's not a lot of spam damage, so the pressure from the Orisa is actually pretty reasonable. I'm not going to bore you guys with the details. I highly recommend you guys to go check this back out again. Basically, Shock ends up getting out their Nano, or getting out their Nano Blade when it matters, and that ends up being the key, and basically helps Shock to win this one out. London kind of fumbles the bag a little bit with the old economy. Last thing I want to talk about here, Pharmacy, really, really good for first point. Not great on second point, but this is something that I would have liked to see from Shock. You can see that even if they have OT spawn, so they get it beyond. Nano, Barrage, a little bit hubristic. A big investment. Really, you would like to see Nano, Pharah, or Barrage, not both. Because that's like those are your ults to wipe out Symmetra May. It's kind of sad that they used both. And then this is really weird. I don't know why he goes Reaper, guys. There are very few DPS that would be worse than Reaper versus this comp. Reaper gets torched on the front line versus this composition if he doesn't have a Ryan, Lucio, whatever his own. I have no idea. If you're going for a cheese pick here, like something to like corn something out, legitimately Widowmaker, probably your best swap. I think Widowmaker would have been Shock's best go. Maybe Hanzo, maybe even like a Genji. I don't know. I don't get the Reaper at all. I don't think there is a worse hero that you could pick in this situation. And I have no idea what. And this is like, again, a classic Shock. Like, why are you? What are these mid round swaps? They make no sense whatsoever. And then they're going to go to Mirror. I'm not going to talk as much about the Mirror. It was definitely an interesting decision by Shock, but given the fact that they could just die on cart over and over and over again and get like one last fight within a lot of ultimates, it's worth rolling the dice off of. The Bastion swap is a little bit interesting. Bastion's not terrible in the Symmetra. Really nice flip from Shock, by the way. But it is, I would say the Symmetra is probably the better, well-rounded brawl comp. But Shock doesn't know how to play the symmetric hero, so they played the Bastion hero, and it ends up being okay. So anyway, all right, let's keep going. I told you this video is going to be really, really long. Wait, oh yeah, that's right. I had a timestamp for that. My bad. Okay, now this is when. Okay, we saved the best for last. All right, this was terrible. Making sure my recording's still going here. 25 minutes. Holy cow. Okay, this was terrible. All right, I'm gonna get my notes here. Okay. Here's how you beat Brawl Comp. You either take angles on the Brawl Comp or you spam them out. This comp has neither. Here are your options here, all right? You've got basically 2 fragile backliners plus a Mei who's just going to be basically run down, has no frontline pressure whatsoever because she doesn't have a Ryan, she doesn't have a Lucio speed. I don't get the Mei swap whatsoever. So here you go. Here are your options, right? You could go Tracer, Kiriko, with BAP playing on Orisa, basically playing hard to get. Your BAP's basically bait for Symmetra TP. Basically just plays his life. Your Tracer, Kiriko work together, and then you can have proper on, I mean, you could go Tracer Genji, you could go Tracer Sombra with Orisa BAP, you could have any sort of weird combination with that. You could go BAP Zen, right, with the Orisa, totally fine, but go with Echo instead, Echo Tracer, Echo Sombra, better punish, so when they TP on your backline and kill your backline, which is basically inevitable, at least you have better punish than you have with Genji Mei. I mean, you have more damage, more punish. If they're going to focus one target, we're going to burn you even more. You could also go Ana Zen and have your support split a little bit and basically sell, like let your Ana die if she gets TP'd on, let your Zen die if he gets TP'd on, but the other support can pocket the other tank or the other DPS and basically land a big anti-nade, get a big spam angle, something like that. You could go Mercy with an Echo and sell your Batiste. You could go Mercy with a Pharah. This is not even a bad pharmacy map. This is a fairly decent pharmacy map. You could go that with a Kiriko Tracer or Kiriko Sombra and a Wrecking Ball, because yes, if they go Cassidy, Wrecking Ball is going to be difficult, but they can't focus the ball when there's a Sombra, Pharmacy, and a Kiriko and a ball. Like there's too many targets for the Cassidy to lock down the ball. You could also have gone just boring old Sombra Tracer with a Winston, but run it with an Ana Kiriko on rollout, where you have more spam damage, more off-angle control, basically just plays against the weaknesses of the Brawl composition. They chose the worst option. Like this is one of the worst spam comps that they could have run. Not only does it lack frontline pressure, it has a very fragile backline without a lot of reward for it, and DPS that aren't going to really punish their backline getting run over. The Orisa is ironically like they run double flex support and then they roll out on this. I don't understand this. That like every part of this outside of the Mei can work. Like you could run like, oh man, you could run like Kiriko Genji with like an Ana, maybe that might work with like a Sombra. Even that would work. But the problem is besides the Mei, there's no excuse for the Mei. It's just terrible. Every single hero in this composition can work, but not in the combination that they put out. It's a disaster. So there's a TP. Backline is dead. Mei and Genji do jack all. Orisa does jack all because she doesn't have an angle on it. And there you go. And they're gonna do it again. And then this is when things get weird. So I'm just gonna skip ahead here. So basically, Finn lands a right click. That's the only way that they win this fight. They kind of trade out this fight. Old economy, and then London comes back and smacks him up. Now Junman goes Doomfist here. And I don't hate it. Doomfist can actually work pretty well because there's no CC on their comp. I don't know how good Doomfist his Doomfist is, but Doomfist is actually pretty good versus this comp. Big AoE punches, lots of shields on your slam, no CC to really punish you. It's fine. Again, the Mei is still here. Probe ends up staying. We're gonna keep swap. I'm gonna skip. I'm telling you guys, it gets crazier. So Probe ends up going Echo. That's fine. You have a lot of spam damage now. And then Finn goes Ana, and basically they go, guys, we give up on this. Let's go better Brawl with like Doom Lucio. So then Finn goes Ana, and then they go Lucio, and then they go like this weird dive hybrid spam comp, which again can work, but the problem as we saw with Shock is even when like this composition has some logic, right? Like we can revitalize our plans earlier and say you could run Ana Lucio with Echo Genji Doomfist. This would be a fine composition to roll out onto with what London's playing. But the problem is this again, the execution. Somehow Junman goes in basically by himself, gets chunked, no one from Shock is anywhere to be seen, and just ends up having to disengage. That's one ultimate wasted. Shock ends up walking forward. Junman again going in by himself. Copy onto Ryan because who knows why. And then Shock have lost again. So now Probe ends up going Bastion for like the last fight contest cheese, wastes turret form. Junman panic swaps to Winston. They have nano blades, so everything's fine. London actually plays it out really well. They have respawn advantage. Probe is going to swap off of Bastion because it's no longer a cheese. And again, we're in a situation where like what Shock is playing is actually fairly reasonable if it's executed well. Because again, you're basically playing, it's the same logic why Sombra Tracer can work versus dive. Like your BAP can just freaking die to any sort of dive. And you have pretty good ult economy. The Lucio's there because it can speed your Ana away from getting TP'd on. And again, you don't need the Brig to peel versus anything. So, but again, it's like classic Shock. I don't know what Junbin sees. Junbin goes by himself after Sombra has already been forced out, immediately dies. Beat isn't there. They force the engage in the top. And then this is one of the saddest moments in the entire series, if not the saddest moment in the entire series. No Junbin to be seen, no Sombra to be seen outside of frontline pressure. A Nano on Genji, he dashes up and gets Nano like he has Blade, but he's 79% on Blade and just dies. I don't know what Shock at this point. This is okay. So this is where like this is where you guys have to like. I'm being really hard on Shock, but if anything, I want you guys to kind of have like a little bit of compassion on Shock, because I'm telling you guys that like these guys were really like at least to an extent boomed at this point in time, totally boomed. Because the mistakes here aren't even like compositional. It's just brains turned off. Brains turned off at that point in time. So it's rough. Like I've been there. I've not only been there as a coach, but I've been there as a player as well. You guys have probably been there in your own ranked games. So okay. All that being said, I don't know if we're going to see these compositions again. I think teams are going to learn from this and try, if they're going to be playing versus London, at least have some sort of simple strategy that they have versus London, if they even need to, if they cannot just play straight up dive. This goes to show that when the alpha chads pull you into the mud, if you don't have a game plan, you're going to get hit in the mouth and you're going to look really, really bad. Because the main thing here is it's not just that Shock played out in the wrong compositions. Even when Shock ended up on the right composition, they were so flustered, so distracted that they were not able to make it work. Hope that makes sense to you guys. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'll chat with you later.